On this edition of Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose, the new Pentagon acquisition reform effort isn't just for acquisition pros.
The senior military leaders, the combatant commanders, where essentially they know they need new capabilities like yesterday, they need to step up and take a look at that as well.
Former Undersecretary of Defense Bill Greenwalt on Fed Gov Today in just a moment. First, though, an important Fed Gov Today TV's coming this week. The Office of Personnel Management will lead an effort to consolidate all the HR systems across government into one. OPM Director Scott Cooper will tell you about that, about attracting new talent to the federal government, solving the retirement backlog, and implementing the schedule formerly known as F. On this week's Fed Gov Today TV, you can watch the show on ABC 7 in Washington, on the Fed Gov Today YouTube channel at 10:30 Sunday morning. You can check listings to see when it's on the American Forces Network this weekend, wherever you watch AFN. The leader of the Pentagon is, quote, pretty close to the reforms the department needs to make to reform its acquisition process, according to one observer, but the details are a distance away from Secretary Hegseth's vision. According to Bill Greenwalt, he's senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, founder of the Silicon Valley Defense Group, former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Industrial Policy, and former senior staff member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. He's writing about the reforms in Breaking Defense. And Bill, welcome. It's great to talk to you again. You lead this piece off by writing the fixes outlined by the Secretary didn't include everything that needs to be done, but he got pretty close, as I mentioned a moment ago. What was close in what Secretary Hegseth said when he rolled this out? Welcome.
Yeah, well, thanks. Pleasure to be here. You know, it was essentially a desire to go fast, to be agile, to do experimental operational prototyping, to essentially compete at the same level with the Chinese, to have flexible budgets, to empower program managers and other officials. It was just like exactly what was needed for acquisition reform. The speech was substantive and it was right on target.
So I'll summarize the chain of events immediately thereafter. You write a week before the speech, Breaking Defense had reported on a draft memo. Then the Secretary gave the speech. And then shortly after that, the actual text of what the reforms were came out. And suffice it to say, by reading your piece, you were underwhelmed, Bill. Am I reading that correctly?
Unfortunately, I was. If you read the original leaked memo, which is out there on the web, it was actually pretty good as well. And it aligned very well with what the Secretary said in his speech. The unfortunate part about it is if you through the wonders of compare documents that you can have today, you can identify, what was changed in between the original memo and the final memo. And it backed off on a number of the things that were the best parts of the speech. And it's just kind of unfortunate because that just sends the signal that the department or whoever decided to finalize the memo is just not aligned with the Secretary on these things.
You write there could be many reasons for these changes. What are some of those, and how is that justifiable in your view? Not that somebody did something nefarious, but just how that could have happened to get from one place to another place.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, they didn't come back and they made policy choices and didn't come back and either tell the Secretary or change the speech. They could have still been in the whole finalization of the memo, and again, just the communication just didn't work. Or it could have been, and this is something we've seen over and over and over again, is that the bureaucracy didn't like what the Secretary was saying and essentially decided that to put enough modifiers in there to ensure that a lot of the substantive change just wouldn't happen.
All right. You parse some of these by starting first, you write, it backs off on pursuing fixed time development and production. Why is that a problem?
That is incredibly important if we're going to compete against China. The way we innovated in the past when we've been successful has been on a fixed, iterative operational prototyping manner. In other words, you get things out into the users. They quickly look at it and say you need to do this or that, and then you move forward and rapidly and quickly. Unfortunately, that was taken out. The other part was taken out was the upfront desire to limit the time it takes to make a decision. And decision time in the department is a requirements process with 3 years, a budget process of 3 years, and a contract process of 2 years. If you don't commit to reducing that time frame, you're never going to get anything out.
All right. You write the rejection of the time-based serial innovation and fielding of the type that's driven Silicon Valley success and once served as the basis for the establishment of the technological dominance of the 50s. How do you get around that? Is there a way to compensate for that short of changing the system, as you said this memo used to and doesn't anymore?
Well, the next phase would be you reform requirements and you get that down to a few months. You have flexible budgeting so that you have a pot of money that you can quickly move into these type of projects. And then the third thing is you need to have something that contracting process that goes fast, and that's other transactions. Other transactions, you can essentially go around the contracting system and move fast in potentially 60 days.
We'll talk about OTAs later in the conversation. The next thing that you write about is the one that of all of the stuff in the original speech from Secretary Hegseth jumped out at me as potentially the biggest change. You write, despite claims from Secretary Hegseth that portfolio acquisition executives and program managers would control flexible budget resources, a final memo backs off on direct delegation of reprogramming authority to PMs. That switch from PEOs to PAEs is a very minor acronym change, but the structural piece of it looked to me like it was pretty radical. Did I read that right? And so if that's the case, why is it bad that it's not there anymore?
It's absolutely was revolutionary to basically create portfolios and portfolios of money, and which essentially could be rapidly moved when you have success or failure. And the only way to do that is to delegate the ability to move that money. And unfortunately, it looks like either the comptroller or the budget section of the department intervened and didn't like that idea and wanted to make sure that it is in the process. And once it's in the process, let's just add 2 years to the process and we're not going to get anywhere.
All right. And the reason that it struck me that that's important is the next thing that you write about. This is a quote from the memo. Acquisition authority shall run directly from program manager to PAE to service acquisition executive with no intermediate offices or approval layers. If those PEOs are still in existence, they're in there somewhere mucking things up is what I read. Am I on track there?
Well, it's not just them. It's just the entire segment of different chains on there that affect acquisition and that you have to wait for them to approve. And so all these different chains of command, all these different stovepipes, the idea was to just go straight to SAE, PAE, program manager, and all of these other organizations will have to go through something else. That's not going to happen. They're back in there, going to back and slow things up. They're going to have to go through mother may I's to do this, that, and the other thing, and decision making. And frankly, accountability becomes mush. And that is really unfortunate.
All right. You mentioned OTAs earlier in the conversation, Bill, and just about every person that I've talked to in either the acquisition or mission delivery area over the last 4 or 5 years has touted OTAs as the way to get things from requirements to deployment as quickly as possible. You write, the prospect of non-traditional participation in the industrial base has dimmed as the preference to use OTAs was stricken from the final memo. Does that mean that they are going to be de-emphasized? Does that mean they're going to be less readily available? Or does that just mean that they're not going to be promoted as heavily as they were in the official line from the Secretary of the Department?
The issue here is that despite having these authorities for decades, and frankly having a more streamlined authority for the last 10 years, the building and the contract community is scared to death of them. And the original memo essentially outlined, not only should you not be scared to death of them, you shall be using them. And by taking it out, you kind of go back into this, well, it's an option. It's something, we may not be feasible to use this, and therefore we're going to be in the same issue we've had for the last 10 years, is not using this authority at scale. And that's really problematic because this is the only way we're going to move fast. And I just don't understand why that was stricken out.
You write about the modular open systems approach. I had Nick Girton on, the former Navy acquisition guy, right when this memo came out. And I said, Nick, you've been pushing modular open systems for 15 years. And so when you saw this, it must have been music to your ears. He said yes. And it looks like this is another area where the department's taken a step back, Bill.
The issue, and this is hard, is how do you put modular open systems on existing modifications of new or old weapon systems? And they backed off that because it is very hard. They can design everything they want in these projects that are potentially not going to be implemented for 20 years, and then they can do modular open systems there. But we need modular open systems architectures now. And we need to ensure that we can swap in and out new sensors and new software quickly. And that means re-looking at the current capabilities we have and applying MOSA to that. That, unfortunately, is not going to happen because they've taken that out. And they've also added lots of waiver authority in there, which, you got to question whether it's really going to take the acquisition process by storm.
Another reference from your piece added to the memo in the separate 45-page acquisition transformation strategy, which we'll link on the show page at fedgovtoday.com so folks can see what's included in all of these documents, were enough qualifiers to ensure that the bureaucracy is given absolute discretion to ignore whatever its political masters have directed. A lot of times when something like this happens, the question that I ask either the people who are promoting it, who are enacting it, or folks like you who are analyzing it, is how to make changes like this stick so that they become institutionalized so that the next folks don't change them. It sounds like this might not even make it that far, Bill.
When I was working on the Hill, the best way in negotiating with the House to try to kill something that they did was to add to the maximum extent practicable, or to add feasible, or to add these qualifiers, and because it does turn it to mush. And that's exactly what's happened here, and that's exactly how implementation will occur until they take them out, and then it becomes directive, and then the only way to not do it is to go back to the decision-making authority and get a waiver not to do something. And that's the way this process should be working, versus giving the discretion to those who don't want to do this in the first place, who are scared to death to do it, who actually believe that it's harmful. And they have the right to believe that. But if policies changes and you want to implement something, you have to be directive about it.
To that end, you write, there's still a lot to like in the final draft. But imagine what will happen in the coming months as the self-protecting acquisition bureaucracy begins to, use quotes here, implement the guidance at the ground level. Who are the people that are best positioned to watch that, to try to hold that to as little change of the intention of the document as possible? Is that overseers on the Hill? Is that the political acquisition leaders in the services or in OSD? Somebody else?
Those two, yes, they should be doing that. But I would offer that the senior military leaders, the combatant commanders, where essentially they know they need new capabilities like yesterday, they need to step up and take a look at that as well. It's not what they normally do, but this is existential. It is vital for them to do this, and they need to make sure that the bureaucracy doesn't let them down.
And to be fair, all of these acquisition reforms tracked with everything that senior uniform leaders have been telling me for 2, 3, 4 years or longer.
Absolutely. It's just, and now they have to basically ensure that it's their own bureaucracy, and some of them are in uniform and some of them are not. And they need to ensure that this is basically put back and reset to where it should be. And frankly, they should be asking for a lot more. There's a lot more reform that needs to be done to really move forward and at the speed that's necessary. This is a great first step in the initial memo and what Secretary Hegseth said, but a lot more still needs to be done, and they should be pushing for that.
We'll review the future steps to take the next time we get together, Bill. Thanks very much for joining me.
Happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
You can find the links I mentioned to the Pentagon acquisition reforms on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. A note about the Fed Gov Today podcast holiday schedule. You'll get new Fed Gov Today podcasts next Tuesday and Thursday, right on schedule. Then you'll get more new shows December 23rd and December 30th. And the new year of Fed Gov Today podcast starts Tuesday, January 6th. You follow the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, on the Fed Gov Today YouTube channel, or on demand at fedgovtoday.com. I'm Francis Rose. I'll talk to you then. Thanks for listening.